time for our first panel, which is Big Data and AI. And it will be moderated by Edward Curry, who is leading researchers in Insight Center of Excellence on Data Analytics. Also, he's vice president of Big Data Value Association, but most important for us is that Ed is chairing advisory board of GATE and is a good friend. And also, I think that this first panel is a panel of friends, people who were involved in the preparation of GATE proposal to European Union funds. And for example, with Evitsa, we are friends and working together with more than 15 years. And currently, he's member of GATE executive board. Also, Torsten helped us in the preparation of business plan, and now is a big great GATE supporter. And Georgi from IBM Bulgaria, he was responsible for elaboration of the memorandum of understanding with IBM Bulgaria, but now he's leader for the country and has a power and wish to support us to make this memorandum of understanding real. So Ed, please, the floor is yours. Sorry about delay, but I hope you will manage.
No problems at all. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great.
Perfect. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Fantastic. So welcome everybody to our first panel, which will be on data and AI, and we'll be talking about data spaces. The first part of this panel, I get the honor of having a presentation to kind of set the scene, to set a keynote, which is a wonderful honor for myself. And it's just really fantastic to be here today at the birthday celebrations of GATE. It's really fantastic to see the center growing and now taking its first steps onto the stage, the European stage, and really collaborating and seeking opportunities to work across Europe. So what I love, when I talk about GATE, I love to talk about Europe being at the heart of GATE in everything from its idea to its nucleus, but it's been a very Bulgarian adventure as well. So it really is fantastic. So today, what I want to talk about is how data spaces will power AI in Europe. And we're going to start off, as you should, with a keynote with a provocative statement. So this is a quote from a very famous author. It's actually William Gibson. He came up with Neuromancer. If you've seen the film The Matrix, it's very much kind of based on that world. He coined the term cyberpunk. He coined the term cyberspace. And he has this famous quote. And he talks about the future is already here, and it's just not evenly distributed. And when people think about this quote, they often think about, the power to create the future is with us. We can do this. And that's very true. But Gibson's an interesting kind of guy. And when you look at this quote, there's actually some nuances to it. Because there's other things here as well. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. It means not everyone has the same level of access to that future. It means maybe the future has been set by somebody else in a different part of the world with different priorities and different values to us. It also means there's challenges around access, inclusivity, fairness of access to that future. So this is it's a deep quote. It's not just about invention, but there's some more societal context to it as well. Within the context of AI, we know that people talk about data being the most valuable resource now in the world, and how data is the key to AI, it's the key to driving AI. And we've heard this before. But we also have a challenge with, well, who owns the data and who controls that data? Is that data evenly distributed? Well, this is an interesting article from the Economist from last year, and also similar articles in Forbes. And they specifically talk about the challenges that we have around the barrier to entry around data, particularly around SMEs, smaller organizations. If you want to create these AI systems, you need to have access to data. You need to have fair access to data, or else you will not have the competition, you will not have the innovation, you will not have that growth evenly distributed across everyone. So that's really the foundation of my talk today. What I'd like to talk about a little bit is where we're going in the future. So we're all talking about smart environments. GATE and in the talks today, we'll have multiple presentations on smart health, smart energy, smart cities. We all understand the future will be about ICT, helping to manage our world, to make buildings smarter, to make energy smarter, water smarter, city, agriculture, all of these things smarter. But when we look at these systems, as technologists, we know that the key challenge here is actually bringing together all of this information from these different systems that have been created. So for the connected car, it's not just about the car itself, but how it connects to the infrastructure, how it interacts with the passengers to deliver information to them, whether it's navigational aids, whether it's personalized entertainment. It's about the ability of society to create value-added services on top of this information that's been created to optimize the usage of the overall fleet of vehicles that we have in society, to have things like new types of business models around how we insure and how we actually require mobility services. So this is an exciting thing. But as engineers and technologists, we know behind this, there's an ecosystem of systems. And this ecosystem has independent systems that have been created that need to be brought together. If we talk to our friends in the systems engineering community, they talk about building systems of systems, the challenge of how do you bring these systems together into a coherent system of system so that information can flow between them, so that we can create this, this vision that we have. So the key challenges that I see from my perspective is that we have major interoperability issues. These are on the protocols, and there has been a lot of progress on protocols in the last couple of years. But the elephant in the room is the semantics. It's basically how do you get that, once you translate that data between systems, how do you get it to work together? And semantics around interoperability is still a significant unsolved challenge at scale. Let's take an example. So we work in the big data PPP, and one of the lighthouse projects that we had was transforming transport. And this really was an incredibly successful lighthouse project. It won many awards. It brought together pilots, I think 22 pilots from across Europe in the mobility and logistics space. It really was a very, very successful pilot. And I would say it's at the state of the art of what corporate enterprises are doing today, the traditional enterprises in terms of digitalization. One of the kind of key messages that they identified in transforming transport was this gold mining metaphor that they had. They start off with the raw data, and they moved it towards insights and been able to extract value from that data. And we can see here on the left, the value that you get at these early stages as you extract the data, you evaluate it, you select it, you prepare it, get it ready for machine learning, etc. The value isn't that high, but the cost of investment is quite high. And in transforming transport, within just that project, they had 164 terabytes of data, over 160 data sources across all of their organizations. They use state-of-the-art techniques in terms of data catalogs for, we'll say, enterprise-level data management. But what they really identified was this challenge at the start of the investment. Most projects fail here because it requires this initial investment before you get to the value return stage. So the return on investment is a difficult thing for businesses to grapple with and to be able to work with. Within transforming transport, they came up with this analogy of the sieve. So how do you work with your data assets through different levels of maturity to start off with understanding what data you have. Then you have, we'll say, you a smaller set of data assets that you understand very well, that you know there's value. And then finally, you end up with a smaller set of very usable data assets. This is state of the art in enterprise data management today. They've done a fantastic job. It really is a great project. But I want to step back and I want to think about this future that we have, this unevenly distributed future. This is what transforming transport was doing, right? And this is what most enterprises in the world today, most enterprises in the world across the globe are doing today. They have their pan, they're out, they're looking for their pieces of gold, and they're very, very happy when they find these nuggets of gold. Yes, we've got some value. Yes, we're going to make money. But when we think about those big data enterprises, the really large data natives, they work at a different scale. They don't have pans. They have these types of machines. They come in and they have industrial level mining at a level that we can't even contemplate. Now, this isn't every organization. There's maybe 10 to 15 organizations in the world that are doing this, but they're doing it at a scale that we cannot even imagine. And this goes back to, again, is our future. The future is here, but it's definitely not evenly distributed. So what does this mean? Well, we all agree there's lots of data. It's been created everywhere. We're good at, as enterprises, we're good at understanding about where data can be generated, how we can analyze it. So we understand these data sources. We understand the oil analogy. As we saw in transforming transport, we're also really good at taking data and putting it to work, particularly in Europe. I think we have a great domain understanding, a lot of expertise, world-leading expertise in different domains. And if we give those people data, those practitioners data, they will put it to good use, they will create value out of it. But there's something missing in the middle. We're missing these data platforms. We're missing the logistical part in the middle that helps us move the data from the source and give it to the decision makers. And we're missing that in the ways that those large organizations have industrial level data infrastructures. We don't have that. We're out with the pans in the stream looking for these nuggets of gold. We haven't got to that industrial level analysis. So what does this mean? Well, what it means is that we need to start thinking more about data infrastructures and what we can do to support our overall infrastructure. There's a lot of talks about data spaces, data platforms, data marketplaces, and all of these are things that we need to investigate and figure out how do we arrive at this industrial level exploitation of data. A couple of interesting examples. Airbus actually managed to deploy themselves an end-to-end data platform across their supply chain that incorporated their customers, their suppliers, their business partners, and they've shown an example with Skywise of how they can bring together a sector around a large corporate to be able to share and to start looking at how they can maximize the data across their supply chain, across their vertical and horizontal industries. Very, very nice, interesting example, driven by a large corporate that had the power to be able to do that. At the other end of the scale, we have examples of where data platforms have been deployed within single organizations. So for example, we had a project with Milano Linate Airport, where they actually deployed a data space to help manage the energy and water management around the airport. Airports are like small cities, so it was effectively like a mini smart city, and they were able to effectively set up data sharing between their different stakeholders to improve water usage, to be able to improve energy management. As part of that project, we actually developed some work on real-time linked data spaces, and what this is really showing is that it's possible to create this at large scale, but also at small scale as well. The key here is the enabler. How do we create enabling data sharing technologies to be able to help organizations move the data from the generation to the decision maker or to the person who can extract value from it? But where does this leave us? What are we going to talk about in the remainder of our panel? Well, we know that we need some form of data infrastructure. And I believe that when we look at it today, Europe is one of the leaders in open data. And I believe that we need to start thinking about what do public data infrastructures look like. I firmly believe that forward-thinking societies will see the provision of digital infrastructures, including data platforms, as a shared societal service in the same way that we see water, sanitation, healthcare, education, mobility, transport as this shared societal service. We will also expect our society to have digital infrastructure that we can all access. People tell me I may be crazy about this, but I'm going to give you a very quick example of where we had in the area of COVID. In March, we didn't have any public data infrastructure for sharing pandemic data within Ireland. And very quickly, in the space of a matter of weeks, we managed to create ourselves a COVID-19 data hub in Ireland. We were able to quickly get all of the stakeholders sharing information, and we've had over 100 million data set downloads since June. Now, Ireland has a population of 4 million people. We have 100 million downloads of this data. That shows you that, one, the public sector in an emergency can respond and provide digital infrastructure, and two, it tells us that people are really interested in data. This is the COVID tracker app that we have in Ireland. It's very popular. It was developed through the public sector working with a small SME, was developed for under €1 million, well under €1 million, and it's actually been used in multiple places in the world, including New York State and a number of other states in the US. Everyone in Ireland is looking at this app, looking at the cases, looking at all of the different data that's been collected and shared. We can do this. We can create public data infrastructure. A little talk, a little mention on the European data strategy. I won't talk about this too much because our previous speaker mentioned it, but I think it is my belief that we're starting to see this as well within the strategy from the Commission. I believe our friends in the Commission also recognize this need for public data infrastructures that are there. In the interest of time, I'll move on to the notion of common European data spaces. I think this is definitely the seeds, the start of this conversation around public data infrastructure, where the Commission want to create these common European data spaces where these different sectors can start to look at how do they share data. It brings the sector together to have the conversation to figure out, well, what will this infrastructure look like? And potentially, in my view, each of these sectors may have a different style of infrastructure. The key is how do we get all those infrastructures to work together, or at least how do we mediate between them? But the important thing is the conversation is now starting. And this is a role that we can play and that GATE can play in that conversation. Another slide I'd like to just briefly present is from the Big Data Value Association. So in response to the European strategy, we have done a position paper on what it would look like to have European governed data ecosystems, data sharing spaces. And one of the key things here from this is that the challenges around these common data spaces is a technology challenge, but not only a technology challenge. We have other critical issues in the area of data governance, of engaging people and educating people, creating the skilled people at both practitioner, domain experts, but also technology experts. We need to understand how this changes organizations, how it changes business models, but most fundamentally of all, the biggest challenge here is trust. And how do we have trust in the data, trust in the infrastructure, trust in the governance, trust in the protocols around these data spaces? This is an absolute key.
Because Thorsten have to leave, can you switch to him?
Speaking
about data spaces?
I'll skip to my last slide.
No, but we'll continue then.
Well, I've only got 2 slides. The last slide is to say there is a European partnership on AI data and robotics that will be trying to lead this charge as well. And really, as my last slide here is, the future is already here. And what we need to do now is to make sure that we evenly distribute it. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Thorsten, and then we can start our panel. Sorry, Thorsten, if I was taking a little bit too much time there.
No worries. So first of all, sound check. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Do you want to share your screen as well?
Yes, one moment. This works like this. Now you should also see my presentation, and I will put it into presentation mode. So now it should be fine, right?
Yes, great.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, Ed, thank you very much for this very good introduction and also bridging between my short input and the input of Peter Droll, because I think it fits very nicely. And I want just 4 or 5 minutes talk about trusted and sovereign data sharing spaces as enabler for AI and big data. So I am Thorsten Hülsmann. I'm one of the 2 managing directors of International Data Spaces Association. It's an association with some 125 members from 22 countries, and it was established in 2016 already. So the thing what Ed just described, the distribution of data and access to data, could also be seen from another angle, from another perspective. Well, it is a little bit the contradiction between interoperability and data exchange or data sharing on the one hand side, because this is what most companies and research activities focused on in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. And of course, this led to all what we are discussing about in the sharing economy and about data-centric services. But on the other hand, what is also true, and Ed mentioned it briefly, and also Peter talked about this, companies do not necessarily want to share their data. And especially, I'm coming from Germany, from a region which is called Sauerland, which with a lot of SMEs, well, they are pulling things and they are producing steel parts, and well, they are very conservative. And these companies never ever would share any data which would give insights into their operations. And therefore, the topic of data ownership, data security, and data value is becoming more and more important. And I think we witnessed this. In IDSA, it is an industry-led initiative. In 2016, this topic was discussed heavily. And well, what we defined afterwards is that data sovereignty is the key issue when we are talking about this dilemma. Data sovereignty not understood as the notion where data is saved. It could also be understood like this, but data sovereignty understood as the ability of a company, of a natural or legal person, to exclusively and sovereignly decide concerning the usage of data as an economic asset. And this then, if this data sovereignty would be placed in the middle, would enable companies to link their data without regret. And so I'm not an AI expert, but I would say I'm an expert, an enabler, and an enabling expert to help companies. And this is exactly a summary. So when we are talking about data spaces, one could also understand data spaces as clean rooms for a prospering data economy. So we are talking about governance for data sharing, like Ed described. We are talking about usage constraints. We call it usage constraint and usage control. And we are talking about trusted manipulation of data. So this is also important when we are talking about data spaces. And rightly also these three topics which have been heavily developed and investigated by the members of our association in the last 3 to 4 years. Standards for data flows between all kinds of data endpoints. This is what an unlimited interoperability means. So with this, we are talking about peer-to-peer networks, data spaces as peer-to-peer networks, linking and relating, for instance, data platforms and data markets. We are talking about trust between different security domains. And with this, IDS already worked intensively about comprehensive security functions, providing a maximum level of trust. And of course, we are talking about governance, usage control, and enforcement of legal requirements and legal contracts, technical enforcement. This is what also is in the debate. And if we just envisage, for instance, a manufacturing company with a lot of, let's say, companies related together, which are, for instance, linked via enterprise cloud systems or industrial data clouds with data marketplaces, IoT clouds, or open data sources, we can see on the one hand side normal data communication flows, which are here described with this black lines. But on the other hand, there are also communication flows where certain usage constraints are necessary. And these are described here with this white communication lines and the IDS connectors in between. And this is exactly what we understand as a data space. It is just one of thousands or millions of data spaces. And by proposing a specific software component, the IDS connector, industrial data clouds, for instance, can be connected as well as individual enterprise clouds and on-premise applications and individual connected devices. So IDSA at the very end is a standard development organization and an organization or an association which develops currently and also maintains a certification scheme for this trust activities. And also very nicely linked to what Ed already had in his input, the 9 data spaces in the key sectors, which are proposed by the European Commission. And I think what first is done is right, concentrate on the domains as such, but the real value comes if we are talking about connecting the different domains, because we do not want to have in the future platform silos. We want to enlarge the data pool and we want to have cross-sectoral benefits. I think this is what data spaces are really about, and this is what is very interesting. What are the contributions of IDSA which have been achieved in the last 4 years? I think conceptually, there is this movement, I would say, this initiative on data sovereignty. Technical, we have the reference architecture model version 3 already. We have a standard started in the German DIN Institute, which is now transferred into an ISO standard. We have a very interesting and active community of actively participating companies. And we have a global reach, as we are also very intensively collaborating with Japanese companies, for instance, Japanese institutions. The Americas are involved. So these global liaisons are of high importance. And the certification scheme, which I already mentioned, a formal certification which states coherence to reference architecture, interoperability, and software quality. And finally, well, we need support, and therefore we started already 2 years ago to create IDSA hubs with 7 countries. We already have formal agreements. I come to this in a minute. And finally, also, when we are talking about this virtual data infrastructure, data spaces infrastructure, which IDSA is focusing on, we also are involved in the endeavor of Gaia X, which is more than bringing the cloud environment into this game, the cloud environment for a federated data architecture. So these are the contributions of IDSA. And finally, let me just mention also the IDSA hubs, because also today is a day to to celebrate that the Gate Institute is our 7th hub, just set up in Bulgaria. And Sylvia, I think this really starts within the project of setting up and establishing the Gate Institute. I think it was already 2.5 years ago when I participated in the EDBA forum in Sofia, and where we talked about how this could be brought together. And now, 2.5 years later, we finally signed the contract and the agreement to Gate becoming the IDSA hub in Bulgaria. This is very interesting and very good development also from IDSA perspective. So this was my input, very short and precise. Data sharing is better than playing alone, but we should stick to certain rules to guarantee data sovereignty. So this is my initial input. I have some 10 minutes more time before I have to leave for our own General Assembly, which takes place today at 10:30. So sorry if I later on just sneak out of the session, but this was my input. Ed, back to you.
That's great, Torsten. Thank you very, very much. If I might start with a question maybe for yourself or maybe to Sylvia, if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on some of the plans that you have for this hub for IDSA in Bulgaria. I think it could be interesting to learn a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe I started, Sylvia can complement. So the reason for this IDSA hubs is that we just need support in the association to reach out to companies and really to to transfer all the knowledge which is elaborated in our working groups into the industry. And therefore, we decided already a couple of years ago that we primarily will have only one hub in each country, which is then the national IDSA workbench, so to say, with the goal to transfer the IDSA activities into the country in question, to talk with also the governments to align the different national supporting schemes, but in first instance to reach out and to train companies and to transfer knowledge. Maybe Sylvia, to complement from your side?
This is especially important for Bulgaria because we are having application domain smart industry, and we are behind the first year. We didn't pay so much attention on this, and thanks to this agreement we have with you, we'll develop further this domain in Bulgaria, and we'll train the companies and ask them to become members of, and with all the benefits to become members of International Data Space Association, to share data, to trust each other, and to get this value of data for their business, which is very much needed in Bulgaria. So I'm looking forward this real collaboration, and yeah, we'll also contribute to your architecture, to the components. I believe we'll have skillful people to contribute also to this. So thank you.
Perfect.
That's great. Thank you very much. What I suggest in the interest of time is that we can maybe look to our next contributor. So next up is Professor Evitsa Savrinkovic. He's a professor of software engineering at Chalmers University of Technology, Gothenburg, Sweden. He's director of Chalmers AI Research Center, and his research interests are in the development of complex software systems, and recently in the area of data-driven and AI-based development of such systems. He's going to present today on the challenges in the development of data-driven AI and applications. So Evitsa, I shall pass over to you. If you can just unmute and we can see your screen.
Yes, thank you very much, Ed. I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen. So excellent introduction. So I'm not surprised, but I'm still impressed by how similarly we are thinking about seeing this need and for the opportunity which we have. But what I want to say here presented is slightly about the challenges in managing data and building this added value. What kind of challenges you have. And I will start with one known paper which was produced by the Google about machine learning, or how to build this added value, what gives you the new new values, and that's what everybody is impressed of, and that's this machine learning and building up the modules which is based on data. But if you look at the entire procedure, what you have, then you can see that this building the code, building this intelligence, it is extremely small part of the all the activities you need to have, and the infrastructure. And this infrastructure and managing data is one of the most difficult part. It requires most efforts and resources, and there are many problems. So we really have to solve all these problems to be able to make this one. And today is the situation that only the biggest companies can do this, the entire chain. So I would like to show you a few examples related to data about the challenges. And one is related to the value of the data. You know, so suppose that we even have possibility to reach the data and then use for some results. And then I will show you one example from Wikipedia. You know, Wikipedia is like a great source of text. There are a lot of pages and a lot of text, and there are many systems now using Wikipedia as starting input data for building their models. And then you can ask, for example, okay, how is the distributions of data or articles in Wikipedia according to the languages? And then you get these results. Of course, English is the first one. Everyone knows that. So it's really a high number of articles. But then if you look what is the second, then you see it's Cebuano language. So maybe you have not heard about that language. On the third one, what do you think? What is the third one? And that's actually I want to solve. It's a Swedish. And that's kind of surprising, because Swedish, you know, Swedes has 10 million people. It's much less than the entire world, but it's third on the list. And then it comes other countries. How that's possible? So if you look at explanation, then you can see like it has so many articles where majority are generated by a bot. And it's about 95% is generated by a bot, and not only by a bot, but most of that is generated by one person. That's one researcher who is translating and using different sources of data, putting in Wikipedia. And actually also Cebuano language is the same. It's another researcher, and it's actually a pair from Sweden, man and wife, and they are producing this data. And then you can ask a question, okay, what is actually the real value of this data? What is the accuracy? What is the trustworthy? What is the relevance? And of course, that case is done in a proper way. You know, this translation from English Wikipedia's pages and so. But still, I want to show here that even if you have data and you have open data, and the data which have to go through strict procedures of controlling, you still there are really challenges to see what is the real value of data and what the data is presenting. The other example I want to show you is related to one case which we had here in Sweden, and that was idea to build up a prediction system for loading of and the capacity of hospitals to predict how many people will need help related to COVID-19. And the idea was to do it for the region Västra Götaland, which is like on the west coast on the Sweden, and then also in the region of Stockholm. And the idea was, okay, to get data from these regional centers, which have all data related to hospitals. You know, people which are coming to hospitals, registers, but also emergency calls, ambulance, and so on. So it's really big data. Then, of course, there was the data from hospitals themselves. That data is not integrated with this previous data. It's like internal data on the hospital. So it's about patients, about logistic data, and so on. And that idea was to combine, to see how that is combined with the movements of people and how they are getting together and related to some social events. So the idea is, of course, take the data from mobile phones to see the people mobility. And there are different telecommunications providers which were ready to give this data, but that data, of course, was not completely. It was done only in a number of people at the place at a certain time, not personal data. And that everything was collected by Ericsson, because there are different providers, and these different providers have their own data. And finally, the Chalmers researchers want to build a model. And so we have met really a lot of problems here, practical problems. First was to get data from health due to this sensitive private data. So there are strict rules, and simply it was not possible to get data. You know, on just actually we succeeded to get in Gothenburg, like signing the contracts, all the project partners which have been there, not to use the data in just in particular case, but we never succeeded to get from Stockholm region, even if there are like the same rules, they are interpreted differently. And of course, the mobility data, even if it was available, like very detailed data, only part of that was allowed to be used, so that actually the results were not so accurate as we wish to have this. And of course, it was very difficult to validate the results because also to access to the data was not really on the real time, but with some few weeks later we would get the data. So this is one example how difficult it is to collect the data, even if the purpose is very, very clear. So what I want to say here, to conclude with that, what Peter and Ed have said. So we have a lot of challenges, and but we have to solve these challenges in some way. These are related to ownership, to the privacy, ethical principles, to the business value, accuracy on the real semantics or real value of data. We have a number of technical challenges which we have to solve in collecting data, in this data, different formats, accessibility, and so on. And in general, I would say at the end, when you're coming to the programming, then you're coming to some basic principles, and that is this machine learning. It creates algorithms, models, but you never know how long these modules are valid. When you change the context, that model, it can happen that it's not valid anymore. But if you don't have a control about which data has been used to the training, in the training, and related to the when it's used for new prediction, then you can run into trouble and come to the completely wrong results. So which at the end can lead to lack of trustworthy of such systems. So there are a lot of principal challenges, and there are a lot of technical challenges, but many of the challenges can be solved. So of course this requires a lot of input and efforts, and that's very nice to see that EU is putting such efforts in addition to industry, which also is doing that. Okay, that was my short introduction to this.
Thanks very much, Evitsa. I'm going to ask you a question on just the last thing you mentioned there was trust. And to me, like trust seems to be the it almost seems to be a panacea type thing where like everyone says we need it, but then when you dive into it, well, it's very complex, and it goes, I think in both the examples you gave there, you talked about the technical trust and the solution. So it's going to be, do we trust these software systems that we're creating? And then in the previous example about data sharing between the two different regions in Sweden, it seemed that maybe there was more trust in one region that what you were doing was okay, and there was maybe less trust about sharing the data in the second region. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on the notion of maybe your experience that you're seeing around trust, whether it's the software system or the ability to share data?
Yes, yes. I think what I see, what I hope it will happen in the future, that more and more data will be available, like open and manageable data, as you have mentioned. We have passed this process. So typical e-health like data from different diseases and so. Many hospitals have a lot of data. This data is not integrated. If we manage to integrate that, and if you manage to make them open, that then the trust will increase for such data, because there will be so many actors who will test this data. So this work on the openness and integration, it really must be encouraged. I know we had a discussion at the hospital. There was discussion, and some people say we should open our data. The others say, no, we cannot do this for privacy reasons, and it's also business value. But I think that the institutions which have, which are like public institutions, they should really have also a goal, and maybe they should be encouraged also to provide available this data. That's one of the things, and that will increase the trust, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a learning. It's a journey we need to go on together to understand what it means to share data, and I think it's a great opportunity for public sector to show leadership in that as well. So
yeah, exactly,
guiding light, and to show that these approaches are acceptable, and best practices can be developed in that space. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Just back to the first slide that you presented, you showed that complexity of systems that are being created, and how ML is only a small part of that, machine learning is only a small part, or AI is only a small part of those systems. Do you think companies will be able to tackle this? It seems almost insurmountable. Like, what are your thoughts on how they should go about that?
So if you see a situation today like this, the biggest producers of AI systems are like 5 companies. So even in the US, they don't have these capabilities, and that's really, so this democratization, or what you have mentioned, that we have to build this future, is extremely important. This infrastructure is the biggest problem, and not only small SMEs, but also medium-sized companies and even larger companies have problems with build up such structures. So the emphasis to putting of this, make possible this infrastructure, as you mentioned, like water or electricity, that's really extremely important to build up. Otherwise it will, because now there is a lot of data open already today, but they are they are maybe not so important. You get a lot of pictures of birds, and that's okay, that's great, but this is not the only data we need for further development. So so EU should probably encourage even companies to open data.
Okay, that's great, Evitsa. Thank you very much. And actually, that leads us nicely to Yuri Ganev. So Yuri actually comes from one of these companies, one of these large companies that create world-leading AI systems. And Yuri has experience from different areas of business. In the last 16 years, he's been working in IBM. He's worked on finance, business consulting. He's focused on organizational change and transformation, things like sales, leading software and analytics businesses, working in enterprise sales, and he is the country leader now for IBM Bulgaria. And Yuri's going to talk to us about the challenges of AI and how this relates to Gate. And hopefully he might touch a little bit on what it's like to work in an organization, one of these large industrial strength organizations that are extracting value from data and building world-class AI systems. Yuri, the floor is yours.
Hi, Ed. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Sylvia, for the invitation. I hope you hear me well. I think I was thinking, shall I put slides, but I decided not to because I think that colleagues covered many of the topics, but I'll try to elaborate on them. And I'll try to link first to Evitsa with the first challenge around data. And this is around, Ed also touched it, it's around accessibility and availability of data. And is that equal? Is it so easy to access data? And second of all, if you remember the picture of Evitsa, how data moves to get to the value and to build a system, and how big was that? You think about also from where you extract and take that data. And this was said about a lot already. And because there are lots of data silos, data is there, but there is a lot of data silos, lots of different options to get data. So nowadays, this is one of the biggest challenge, actually. I mean, how you move this data around. And this touches the infrastructure story because you need to put it somewhere. But there are also other trends lately that are addressing this issue. And this is more about the data virtualization. So moving less and less data around, because even if you look at the job of the data scientists today, and these people that are producing the added value at the end, I mean, most of their time is still about crunching the data around and moving it, getting it together, using the right data, ensuring quality. And in today's world, after we're talking for more than a decade, I believe how important data is, and about this, I refer to the picture of it with the new oil or new electricity. Everyone calls it differently. This is somehow showing you that still we are having challenges because it's hard. The time to produce a result, it's a long time. And I can give you an example with customer of ours who was looking for real-time scoring of their customers. You come, you apply, it's a bank for credit, and they tell you yes or no immediately. This was the goal. This took them a year and a half. Models were built quickly. They knew the models were right, but putting the data together, the right data to make sure quality of the data is there. I mean, dealing with all the IT internal challenges and whatsoever to get access to the right data. Even their one organization, this was taking most of the time. Let's put it like this. So this is the first challenge. I mean, how you minimize this data movement? Because, I mean, if you continue to move data around and put it in a bigger and bigger repository just to have it at your disposal, you're looking at huge cost, okay? And you cannot afford it. If I mentioned it, many companies cannot. So you would be looking to try to virtualize data so that you have less time to move data around and quicker time to value to get the data at your disposal. The second, I think it was touched by many people already, but this was talent. I mean, talent, it's a big issue around data, and what I see in the organizations, how they bring talent and how they grow talent. And especially, no one wants to do the dirty work, especially that I mentioned around crunching the data around. Everyone wants to do this, call it a nice, interesting ML work that they will build something and they will have an outcome. People are focused on the nice thing around data science, but there is also dirty work. Someone has to do it. And this was shown very nicely in the picture of Evitsa before that. I mean, in today's world, there is a talent issue everywhere. So this, I think, very nicely relates to what our colleagues and friends in Gate are trying to do, because they want to nurture this talent. They want to grow this ecosystem. They want to grow people in Bulgaria and talent, and, to have outcomes at the end of the day. And third and very important one, it's trust, mentioned many times already, okay? Trust was mentioned in terms of the first issue around data silos and who do you trust to give your data on one side, and how you gain the trust of the other people to get their data. So this relates to governance, security, sovereignty, and many other things that have to be taken care of, and accessibility. But one very important thing, it's more or less at the end of the chain or even in the middle. Two important trends, I believe. One is more about the fairness of data and the models, and how fair the outcome of our model is. Is it there a bias in this model, like gender, race bias, or whatsoever? Do we have the right data sets to ensure that there is no bias in our model and the outcome that we produce? And this relates again to what data you access to, what data sets you use, how you manage it, how you ensure that you have the right data sets so you don't produce a bias in the model. So it also relates to the other part. And one other very important one, it's explainability of the models. Why is this important? Because nowadays, many colleagues know that the techniques are becoming more and more powerful. They're extremely powerful techniques to produce data. I mean, deep learning and many other. I mean, and they're improving more and more different techniques. But many of them are black boxes. You put something in, you don't know what happens in between. So you need to have a way to explain why this happened. What did you produce? Why did it come out? And this is very important for I believe, because people will trust this model and they will trust the result that you produce for them. And this goes back to trust, because if you produce something that I can trust, I'll take it. I'll use the service, I'll share my data, and so on. So this is like not a vicious circle, but a good circle that I hope our colleagues from Gate will observe in their model. I see this in their, how to say, in their practices, but I hope that they will take that into consideration and will take that forward for the better future and the better results that they will produce. Generally, and I will conclude with one thing. I mean, just to give you an example, and I'll use also Ed's story on that. In Bulgaria, for example, what I have seen, I mean, our customers are very good at uniting when there is a common bet. Okay, common bet like cyber attacks, and then you see customers sharing data in between them in order to beat the certain attack that it's for certain sector or for certain type of customers, and they unite. And Ed gave very good example in the beginning, the COVID data hub in Ireland. I mean, the common bet is against us. People united, they share data and they work. So, I mean, if you think of use cases where you can easily, maybe easier to do something and to progress faster from Gates' point of view, maybe some of the, common bad cases for the society can be a good start for them on that side. So consider that in the future. This would be my advice, because we usually focus on the best and the nice. We want to do it, but then we face all the other challenges behind that. People don't want to share data. Evitsa mentioned, even if we wanted to get the data, we were not allowed to use it. We couldn't get it, and so on. And this can be, something to consider going forward. This was my short message for today. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Yuri. There's a famous quote from Winston Churchill that says, "Never waste a good crisis." So maybe our friends in the UK are leveraging the crisis now, but I see the wisdom as well. When you have these opportunities to bring everyone together, you can really make giant steps together. Some really, really great points, Yuri. Two things I wanted to touch on, though, because you brought some new elements into the conversation. You talked about skills and the challenges that we have there, and we also talk now about building systems we trust, which requires engineering, requires knowledge of data. In your experience, what kind of skill set is required, we'll say, from the graduates and from the people that Gate is going to create in the next couple of years? What do you think will be important for those people?
What will be important? I mean, look, there. I mean, there are certain areas of building the result of IE, and I think these, if I can, crunch them like this in terms of areas, definitely data architecture is one thing that I see missing a lot and is being committed, honestly, because everyone focuses on this, on the ML, deep learning, and the skills that will produce a good and nice result at the end. But having good data architects, I see this skill very scarce on the market. The second one, it's around the data engineers, I call them, because these are the people that work with the data and make it ready, ensure that it's properly prepared, in good quality. They care about governance, that. I mean, there are many roles under it, but this would be the so-called group. I call them like this. And last but not the least, I mean, there are trends around, I think they call it differently, data ops, ML ops, doesn't matter. I mean, how you make this working, and this would be also important for Gate, how they organize processes, organization, even way to fail fast. I mean, you don't want to work for a year and a half to realize that you failed and this project will not work. You need to realize this in weeks. So you need to have these small pilot projects. Even we in IBM practice this nowadays, honestly speaking, and with customers. So this is a very important, how to say, skill, how you organize all this process internally in the organization. Yeah, obviously you need to use practices like Agile, and this MLOps, it's close to DevOps, let's put it like this, but in the data space, from that perspective, let's put it like this. That's more or less the three key skills I would be looking at. I mean, and I see
it's a really nice connection with Evitsa's first point around the complexity of those systems and all the skills that are required around ML and AI to be able to make it work. Fantastic. And then the final question I'll ask Yuri is, so Gate is now in it's established, it's 1 year old. What are the incentivizations for getting organizations involved in Gate locally? Like what are the things and the benefits that they'll get from being involved, and how can we incentivize organizations to participate in Gate and work with it?
Yeah, on incentives, I would assume is the most focus, because people like incentives. I'll skip the money part because I think this is hygiene. Let's be fair. I think very important, and most of the leaders nowadays recognize this. It's recognition, and bringing today's world, expectations to life, like ease of use with good results, fast time to market. So if I give you my data, how will I benefit from a better service, faster time to market, ease of use of any given use case or whatever we are tackling together? So this would be critical for me if I have to make a decision as a user as an owner of data. But this also tackles the maturity of the market, and this would be one of the, I would say, maybe the challenges of Gate, because in Bulgaria, I would dare to say the maturity of people sharing data around, it's not at the level of a more Western European world. I'm sorry to say that, but I hope Gate will change that. We were doing a study for how local organizations are using data and AI. It was not last year, actually, exactly, 2019. And I saw that many of them were ready to use external data, but almost none of them was ready to share data. These were two of the questions out of the study, almost none of them. And I was interviewing banking, telco, insurance, government, mostly, these four sectors. And these were, some of the results. So this will be a challenge for sure. So they need to find a way how to tackle this challenge. And I think that's why I mentioned the case for Common Bet. I mean, think of Common Bet so that they're more open to share the data so that they resolve a common issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuri. I'd like to thank all my panelists, Evitsa, Yuri, and also Thorsten beforehand. I think it was a really interesting conversation. I'm going to hand it back to Sylvia. I'm sorry, Sylvia, we're a little bit late, but I think the conversation was most definitely worth it. So
yes.
back to you, Sylvia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting and a lot of truthful for thought. So a lot of things we need to consider in the future, and a lot of good ideas coming from your side. And it's normal that we are together. We're on the same page. We share the same values and the same view of how to develop further. And I think that's one good example. We succeed to sign this agreement with Sofia municipality to exchange data. So it's one step in this direction, which I think if we have one good example, they will follow from other industries, but it needs a hard work. And also for data engineers in Sweden, they have such a position, data engineer, which is not available in Bulgaria. We don't know what is this, but now we will educate people. We are preparing the training courses and research and master program to do this and to prepare such people which are needed in the industry. So thank you very much for your input. And we'll stay together and we'll have more focused workshops on different topics we are working in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.